So there is a 115-inch TV right there. But today I want to tell you guys why this Samsung Z Fold 7 is my favorite TV of 2025. Or I guess I should say favorite display at least. Because this thing is so much more useful than I thought it would be. And I have been a little bit of a fold curious person when it comes to Samsung phones for a bit. I do have the S25 Ultra in hand here too, to do a little comparison. But today it's all about the Z Fold 7, how useful is it, how productive I can be with it, and why it's actually a TV replacement. So I'm gonna go over some of the specs and features of this phone, give you some of the drawbacks, some of the benefits, and why I may prefer it or not prefer it to the S25 Ultra. All in this video, so let's do that right now. So over the years, I've had a lot of Samsung phones, from the Galaxy phones, the Notes, the Ultras, and for the last couple years, I've kind of avoided getting a foldable because I just didn't think that it would perform at the same level. But interestingly enough, both the Z Fold 7 and the S25 Ultra share the same Snapdragon 8 Elite processor, so we'd expect these two phones to perform similarly, and they do for the most part, but there is some differences that I'll go over at the end of the video. But you can probably notice a similarity right off the bat, which is both of these phones, well, when this is folded anyway, are 8.9 millimeters thick, but you can't unfold the S25 Ultra. But when you do with the Z Fold 7, now we're talking 4.2 millimeters thin if you don't include the cameras here. Now, obviously you need to include the cameras in the overall thickness, but I think we're just talking about how thin the actual phone is, which is pretty amazing. So the cover display on the outside is 6.5 inches. That's 2520 by 1080, and that is 120 hertz screen, while the inside screen is 8 inches, and that's 2184 by 1968, which is basically a square, and that's also 120 hertz. Both of them are OLED screens as well. And while both the front and the inside screen are about 2600 nits, which is extremely bright for a TV, for a phone, for anything you're going to be displaying, I thought the inside screen would be a little less impressive with regards to brightness. But in fact, I am equally impressed by the outside screen, which is a little thinner, kind of that widescreen 21:9, while the inside screen with that gigantic footprint is still really bright, and I don't really notice any downside, to be honest, besides from the fact that it might not have the best anti-reflective capabilities that that outside screen has that we kind of traditionally like with OLED TVs. But in the end, what I think is most impressive is just how large this screen is compared to a traditional phone. Now, if you get the 256 gigabyte or the 512, you actually only have 12 gigabytes of RAM. And if you get the larger 1 terabyte version, you get 16 gigabytes of RAM. So I'm not sure if there's much of a difference between 12 and 16. This seems to be working just fine for running multiple applications. But at the end of the day, you're gonna have to determine if you wanna spend extra cash, because yeah, this phone is really expensive to start, but we'll talk more about that later. Now, the main camera on the Z Fold 7 has a 200 megapixel sensor, so it's absolutely massive. But at the same time, there's also a 12 megapixel ultra wide and a 10 megapixel telephoto lens. So you have 3 lenses that are really bulky on the back of this, but obviously as we take pictures with our phone all the time, it's gonna be very useful. And then there are actually 2 selfie cameras on this. One of them is inside on the big screen, and then the other one is on the front screen. So when it's folded or open, you can still take a selfie either way. And in fact, I should say there's a third way, because you can actually use the screen to take a selfie with the main 200 megapixel camera as well and still kind of preview it. So that's also a new feature and something that you're able to do if you have a screen on the same side as your big camera, which this does when it's open. So that's nice. Now, I will say that that 200 megapixel camera is an absolute beast. I took this phone to China while I was traveling doing another video, and a lot of the footage that we got from this phone is kind of like side B-roll, ended up being in the video that we made, because that was the best footage that we took. Now, maybe that's just because this was the phone that was always out, and sometimes you forget to, just make sure that you're getting content everywhere you are when you're on vacation or overseas. But I just thought it looked really great. Now, I have heard on the streets that some of the other cameras, the wide angle and the telephoto, aren't exactly flagship quality. Maybe that is because of, the size of this phone, how thin it is. that they just can't fit everything in there. But overall, I'm gonna be taking a majority of the important photos with the big 200 megapixel sensor, and I thought all the other pictures that I took with the selfie cam looked totally fine. Now the Z Fold 7 has a 4400 milliamp hour battery, which is the same as the Z Fold 6. I don't have one of those to compare it against as far as its efficiency, but I found this Z Fold 7 to last like all day. I've been using and abusing this phone, watching content in so many different ways. You know, I'm gonna show you that in just a second, but the battery seems to last almost all day. And when I plug it in, you know, it does charge up pretty quick. Now it only charges at 25 watts, which is a little bit slower than a flagship phone typically does. And you know, it does seem like that is because of how thin this is. I don't know what other reason there would be to make it charge slower than, let's say, the S25 Ultra, which has a 5000 milliamp hour battery and charges, I think, at 45 watts. So when you do have it plugged in, the Z Fold 7 takes about an hour and a half to charge, while the S25 Ultra only takes like an hour. But because of how useful the Z Fold 7 is, especially when the screen is open, I think it's a good trade-off. Something that I haven't seen a lot of people mention is that the fingerprint sensor is actually on the side of the phone, which is absolutely awesome, because I've had a few generations of these Note and Ultras that the fingerprint sensor's on the middle, and while it's fine, it does kind of get a little fickle depending on what kind of screen protector you may have on, or if your fingerprint's a little dirty or whatever. But the Z Fold 7 having the fingerprint sensor on the side ends up being very convenient. You can just tap it, it registers your fingerprint, and your phone comes on a lot quicker than having to hit that button and then reach for the middle of the screen. Just a small little thing to think about. But enough about the specifications of the Z Fold 7, because I want to talk about why this is my favorite TV. Now first, I had said on the front screen, it is kind of a wide angle 21:9 ratio. So if you're watching content, you know, it looks totally fine. It gives you a little bit more width than you're used to. And some of the programs that I watch on here, like YouTube, Netflix, HBO Max, sometimes I feel like a little bit gets cut off on the sides of a traditional phone. But on the Z Fold 7, you're getting the full width and a little bit more. But at the same time, it's a slight bit smaller than the screen of something like the S22 Ultra I had, or this S25 Ultra. But that doesn't have the ability to open up into this immersive 8-inch screen that can just do so much more. So for me, traditionally, I would have this in mini mode so I could be productive on my main phone and at the same time have a screen that's smaller watching a program, whether it be football, sports, news, whatever it may be. But I don't have to do that any longer with the Z Fold 7 because of the size and width of this screen. I'm actually able to do at least two things at once, whether it be watch a YouTube video on the top half of the screen and on the bottom getting some work done where I can actually view the program on top without having to squint, unlike my previous phones. But I also can go 2x2 left and right. So that comes in handy when I'm looking at stuff like fantasy football on one side and doom scrolling on Twitter on the other. In both instances, you can kind of orient the screen however it's most convenient, and you can even split the screen up to 3 and 4 different things. Now, I have heard some people complain that this One UI 8 isn't their favorite operating system, but whatever they're doing for this multi-view system here, or their picture-in-picture, is absolutely incredible, because I'm just able to get so much done, and it's just, I'm able to see it for once, which I just couldn't see it on the other smaller screens that I've had for phones in the past. Now, when you decide to get fully immersed in a movie and just go widescreen, that's where it becomes a lot of fun, especially if you get a nice case that has one of these little magnetic kickstands like I have here, both a dual purpose in that it can charge wirelessly and it gives you just a really convenient way to prop your phone up so you can just sit back and relax and watch some content. And that's sort of the point, because it's just so much more convenient when you have your phone on you all of the time, and all of the apps are so useful to just pop on a movie and press play, especially when the screen is so large. Even in comparison to a pretty good sized TV that we have like out in the game room here, if I have this from a foot or 2 feet away, the screen is as big or bigger than that 75-inch TV that's 10 feet away. And the ability for me to be productive at the same time while still having that 16:9 movie on the top and still being able to be productive on the bottom of your phone. Another great feature of their UI is that if you are in that Samsung ecosystem, there is a lot of connectivity. And I know that's not like totally revolutionary. I think Apple has that with their system, but to have the Buds 3 Pro, for example, the headphones that I have with 2 phones, and the headphones knowing to switch from one to the other when you might be watching a program on one and then you get a phone call on the other, it'll pause and go over to take that call. Or if you have just one phone like most people and a Samsung TV, the same is true. You can just pause your phone and press play on your TV, and if those headphones are paired with it, it'll just pick up right where it left off. So that is a really cool feature. Now there are a couple of small downsides, I would say, to having this phone that I've noticed so far in the few weeks that I've had it. One of the main things is that the apps don't work the same on this phone as they do on other Samsung phones because they're used to being skinnier and taller. And so when you double the screen's width, some of them don't work exactly the same. Now it's not all apps, but a couple of the fantasy football ones that I have are just more difficult to navigate on a square screen just because I don't think they were designed to be on something like this. And the same thing goes with our home screen. I mean, you actually get two home screens or two pages of the home screen, but for example, the Google search bar only covers half of the screen and you can't get it to go all the way across. I would prefer it to go all the way across. Maybe it's just more of a uniformity thing, but that's just one example of the differences. Now, another downside to the Z Fold 7 is that it does not have an S Pen, which is something that, I use about 25% of the time I'm using my phone, I would say, maybe even a little bit less, but there's really no room for it. I think they've made this so thin that they just do not have any more room to put that S Pen. And that's a little bit disappointing. Now the Z Fold 6 did have an S Pen. It didn't go inside the phone either, and actually you had to buy it separately, but it actually worked on the inside screen, which would just be so nice to have. And I didn't have that phone, so I've never experienced it on this big screen, but I already know that that would be something I really would like because I've always used the S Pen on my other Samsung phones. Now, all of us that have an S Pen are just waiting to lose it and then have to buy another one. And we only use it about 5 to 10% of the time. So there's just gonna be trade-offs with different phones, right? Now, the last physical limitation that this phone has is that it doesn't stand up great in extreme heat. And I think that's because of how thin the phone is versus something like the S25 Ultra. So I have taken this into the sauna and watched content while I was baking, and it just doesn't make it as long in the multi-app mode. It actually crashes out and just goes into single app mode, something that does not happen with the S25 Ultra. Now, not everyone is gonna be inside of a sauna, I understand this, but if you live in an environment that's hot and or sunny, it's gonna be a factor when deciding if you should buy something that's very thin and has a great processor, but just might not be able to get rid of that heat, or get an absolute unit like the S25 Ultra that just continues to keep on working. Now, one other issue people seem to be concerned with is the folding mechanism of this phone itself, which is really amazing. This thing has a very solid feel to it when you open and close it. It's not too strong, it's not too weak. They've done a really good job at making this screen, and you can open and close this thing hundreds of thousands of times per Samsung. And I've seen a certain YouTuber kind of give this a stress test. So if a guy that makes his living destroying phones finds this thing pretty durable, at least with regards to that flex test, you know what? It's good enough for me. But when you close up the Z Fold 7, it is just a little bit more narrow than the S25 Ultra. And now I'm having a pretty hard time with both of them, to be honest, because after using the Z Fold 7, the S25 Ultra seems like it's so big and clunky. But at the same time, the Z Fold 7 is just a little bit too narrow. So I don't know if there's going to be like a Goldilocks and the Three Bears situation phone here that's right in the middle of these two. Maybe it's just the S25 regular, but both of these phones are pretty awesome. The Z Fold 7 is a lot more expensive though, and that is another downside I would say. This starts off at like $2,000 for the least expensive version, while I think the S25 Ultra is actually only $1,300 starting. So there's a big $700 difference in the two phones, and that's a big chunk of change. But if you use the links in the description, you can go to the Samsung website and find out what sort of trade-in value you might get for your phone. There are some big discounts to be had, so definitely check those links in the description. But overall, the Z Fold 7, awesome phone. I really like it. It is really expensive, but to be able to open it up and get so much use out of that inside screen, so much productivity, so much more screen to just watch programs and do what you want to do with, it's just such a luxury to have. I absolutely love it for watching content, and I do find myself using this to watch programs all the time. It's so much bigger than when I'm trying to use the S25 with the mini mode going on. But at the same time, when I'm on the go and the phones are closed, I do prefer the S25 just a little bit more because it's a little bit more screen and it's something that I'm used to. So you guys are gonna have to decide, is it time to take the plunge and go for a foldable phone, the Z Fold 7, something that's super thin and useful, get 2 or 3 or 4 apps going on at once, double the size, but maybe just a little bit less in performance, or are you just gonna stick with the traditional format like the S25 S25 Ultra? You guys will have to let me know in the comments. Make sure to check out the links while you're down there. Samsung's got all kinds of promotions going on. And make sure to smash the like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And I'll see you guys in the next one.